I bet you're here to see Jodie. Yeah, she told me she quit.
No, I just feel like I don't want to let them down.
Well, quitting is letting them down. Trust me, you went through an entire layout with a sprained ankle and a sprained foot. Trust me, you are their hero.
Okay, okay, I think I can do it.
You're my hero.
I found paragraphs of her book sprinkled throughout your essay.
Oh no.
You panicked, and the solution was to plagiarize? It's okay, I'm not going to tell the dean. You had no idea the pressure that you're under. I'm here for you anytime you need to talk.
Thank you.
Samantha, you live in a big house, and you go to the best schools. You have beautiful things. What else do you need from him?
His time.
I'm in charge of his schedule. I think I can do a better job of arranging time for you both together.
Thank you. I think he's been cheating. I found a receipt. Not a hotel, but it was for jewelry.
Your husband told me to come pick up his planner. Can I grab it?
That's a really nice bracelet.
Thanks.
So, where'd you get it from?
My husband obviously bought you that. So how long you been fucking him for?
I'm a lesbian.
Really?
I've had a crush on you this whole time.
This film, taken as a whole, unfolds as a deeply interior portrait of women moving through pressure, expectation, and quiet yearning. And what makes it resonate so powerfully through a queer, emotionally grounded lens is not that it insists on romance at every turn, but that it understands how queer experience so often begins in the space between recognition and articulation, between what is felt and what is permitted to be named. Across its intertwined storylines, the film repeatedly returns to women who are struggling under inherited scripts of success, of loyalty, of perfection, of heterosexual inevitability, and who find in other women not escape but reflection, a mirror that allows them to see themselves more honestly than the worlds that raised them ever did. At the narrative center is Jodie, a young woman whose identity has been collapsed into performance, achievement, and faultless execution, particularly through cheerleading, which becomes both literal sport and metaphor. A discipline that demands flawless synchronization, suppressed fear, and the willingness to absorb pain without complaint for the sake of the team. Jodie's injury and her catastrophic self-blame over last year's nationals reveal how deeply she has internalized the belief that one failure nullifies her worth, a belief many women recognize from early adolescence, when approval becomes conditional and excellence becomes survival. Her impulse to quit is not laziness or weakness, but an attempt at self-protection, a way to escape a system that has taught her to equate love with performance. And the film treats this impulse with compassion rather than judgment. Enter Julia, whose presence immediately shifts the emotional gravity of the story, not because she rescues Jodie, but because she listens to her in a way that few others have. Julia's role is quietly radical. She does not dismiss Jodie's fear, nor does she romanticize endurance for its own sake. Instead, she reframes Jodie's narrative, reminding her that persistence through injury was not failure but heroism, that the story Jodie tells herself is not the only one available. For queer audiences, this reframing is deeply familiar, echoing the experience of having one's life interpreted through a lens that never quite fits, and the relief of encountering someone who sees not deficiency but resilience. Julia's language is notable for its gentleness and precision. She does not pressure Jodie into staying for abstract ideals like tradition or reputation, but grounds her encouragement in care for the people who depend on her and, crucially, in care for herself. The moment where they exchange, "You're my hero," is not sentimental excess but mutual recognition. A declaration that admiration between women can be reciprocal and sustaining, not hierarchical or competitive. And this reciprocity challenges a culture that so often pits women against each other for validation. Running parallel to this is Julia's professional storyline, which expands the film's exploration of women's emotional labor beyond adolescence into adulthood, showing how the expectation to manage other people's needs does not disappear with age, but simply changes form. Julia navigates ethical dilemmas with empathy rather than rigidity, particularly in her interactions with Samantha, a woman whose marriage is quietly unraveling due to emotional neglect, and whose suspicion of Julia reflects a broader societal reflex to interpret intimacy between women through heterosexual jealousy. The scene where Samantha accuses Julia of sleeping with her husband collapses decades of cultural assumption into a single moment, that women exist in relation to men, that closeness between women must be competitive or deceptive, and that desire always points back to male attention. Underscoring how queer longing often exists unspoken within ostensibly straight lives, constrained by fear and social expectation. This subplot reinforces one of the film's central themes, that women's desires are frequently dismissed as secondary, confused, or inappropriate unless they serve an approved narrative, and that queer women are often asked to be legible only in moments of crisis. The second major arc, centered on Yhivi and her professor, deepens this thematic exploration by examining how intellectual and familial inheritance can function as another form of constraint, particularly for young women whose identities are overdetermined by legacy. Yhivi's plagiarism is not portrayed as simple dishonesty, but as a symptom of panic and erasure, a moment where her own voice disappears under the weight of expectation. And this disappearance resonates strongly with queer viewers who recognize the impulse to borrow legitimacy when one's authentic self feels unsafe or unrecognized. The professor's response is a study in ethical care. She names the violation without humiliating Yhivi, and in doing so models a form of authority that does not rely on fear, but on belief in another woman's capacity to grow. Their conversation becomes an intimate reckoning with selfhood, particularly when Yhivi admits she never wanted this academic path, that she longed for theater, for embodiment, for a different way of being seen. This confession is not framed as rebellion, but as grief, and the professor's insistence on separating Yhivi's goals from her father's becomes one of the film's most quietly subversive gestures, articulating a question that many queer women are never asked aloud. What do you want, not for approval, but for yourself? The choice to give Yhivi time, to protect her from institutional punishment, while still demanding accountability, mirrors the kind of conditional mercy queer communities often extend to each other in the absence of broader societal support. Recognizing that survival sometimes requires bending rigid systems without abandoning ethics. Symbolically, Yhivi represents the woman at the brink of self-authorship, terrified that choosing herself will result in exile, while the professor embodies a future version of womanhood that values integrity over obedience, and their connection, though non-romantic, is profoundly intimate, reminding viewers that queer resonance is not confined to sexuality but lives in recognition, mentorship, and care. Across all these narratives, the film consistently resists sensationalizing women's relationships, and this resistance itself becomes a critique of a culture uncomfortable with women loving each other in ways that are not consumable or easily categorized. Society's discomfort persists, the film suggests, because women's emotional bonds destabilize hierarchies that rely on women's availability to men, to institutions, and to ideals of self-sacrifice, and queer women's stories, in particular, expose how arbitrary and fragile those hierarchies are. By focusing on emotional safety rather than physical spectacle, the film insists that intimacy is not defined by transgression, but by trust, and that desire can be present even when it is unspoken, deferred, or redirected. Jodie's fear of failing again, Yhivi's fear of disappointing her family, Samantha's fear of being unwanted, and Julia's quiet steadiness all orbit the same emotional truth, that women are often taught to minimize their needs in order to remain lovable, and that becoming visible, to oneself or to others, requires unlearning that lesson. The film's power lies in its refusal to rush this unlearning. It allows its characters to linger in uncertainty, to speak haltingly, to circle their truths before naming them. And this pacing mirrors real queer lives far more accurately than narratives of sudden awakening or dramatic rupture. For lesbian and broader LGBTQ+ audiences, the film offers a rare sense of recognition, depicting women whose connections are meaningful without needing to be immediately sexualized or resolved, and whose journeys toward authenticity are ongoing rather than neatly concluded. For women more broadly, it provides a language for understanding burnout, perfectionism, and the quiet despair of living someone else's life, while also offering hope that connection, especially connection with other women, can be a site of healing rather than competition. Ultimately, this is not a film about taboo or fantasy, but about the courage it takes to stay present with oneself under pressure, to accept care without shame, and to imagine a future not dictated by fear. In centering women's interiority and treating queer resonance as a matter of emotional truth rather than spectacle, the film makes a compelling case for why such stories matter, because they remind us that becoming visible is not about announcement, but about allowing oneself to be known, slowly and imperfectly, in a world that has rarely made space for that kind of honesty.